domestic violence.
Oh wait, sound?
Oh,
That's-
sounds also speaking.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Dominic, scene one, take one. Mark.
And also between questions, I'll probably take a little pauses
Okay.
just for editing purposes.
Okay.
And so we'll start off with your name, where you're from, and who you used to be.
My name is Dominique Waltower. I'm from San Diego, California, and I used to be a domestic violence offender.
Growing up, did your childhood have an effect in your abusive behavior?
Absolutely. That's exactly where I learned it from. Ironically enough, I learned this behavior from my mother, who learned it from her parents, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a DNA to this behavior, and so I've done the research and found out exactly where it came from. My father, who wasn't in my home, was also someone that was abusive. That whole environment when I was younger was very, very instrumental in the behavior when I became an adult.
At what age did you encounter your first victim?
19. So 19 years old, and I was in an argument with my girlfriend, and she slapped me, and then I slapped her back. And I remember just being in a rage saying, "Don't ever put your hands on me." And then I left the house, and then a day later, she called me. And so when we were talking on the phone, I noticed her voice was different. I was like, "Why are you talking like that?" And she said, "You dislocated my jaw." And I said, "What?" No. And I said, my first response was, no, I didn't, because that wasn't my intent. And so that was a time where I was very, very unaware of the behavior. So our relationship continued, and our relationship was more of it was a back and forth. This young lady was just as dysfunctional as I was. So one day I'm the victim, next day I'm the perpetrator, vice versa. We did that for a couple of years. But that was definitely my first encounter as an adult. Ironically enough, my first actual physical fight was with my mother, and I was 13 years old. So that kind of set the tone, and it was much like programming, like a computer. A computer gets programmed, and that program's going to run. And if you want something else to run, you have to install something else. If you want that off, you have to uninstall it. So for me, as a kid, it was programmed, and I didn't know it was programmed. And then when it was brought to my attention, the embarrassment and the shame, of actually having that behavior, put me in a position to protect it and say, well, no, it's not an issue. It's everyone else's issue. It's not my issue. It's their issue. So yeah, I was 19 years old the first time that started as an adult.
What feeling provoked you into wanting to physically or emotionally damage the other person?
The feelings, there was a lot of different feelings. Before you get to the behavior, there's a sea of emotions underneath that. And for me, it was humiliation, it was fear, it was insecurity, it was uncertainty, it was just feeling disrespected or feeling unworthy and less than. And so those are all of the emotions that would, and there was plenty more, but I just off the top of my head, those are some of the basic ones that really motivated my behavior. And the average daily person feels those all the time, but they don't have the connection of those emotions and then leading to that behavior. And so for me, it was, again, learning as a child that this is okay. And that's what it's pretty much what it wasn't an official class, but after my mom would abuse my stepdad, there was no intervention. There was no one that said, "Hey, this is wrong. This is a problem. We need to stop this." We just went on as normal. So after the fight, a couple hours later, it's like, "Hey, you guys hungry? I'm like, yeah, I can eat, you know, and then we just went on with daily life and no one ever talked about it. So those emotions underneath are very important. Those are that's the part that we have to deal with when changing domestic violence. People say anger management, and anger management is, you know, anger is like the engine light in your car. The engine light comes on and that just lets you know something's underneath that and that's wrong. And so it's important to go underneath to deal with all of those issues. The humiliation, those emotions that I mentioned. And so throughout this process, I've learned to manage those and not allow them to go to anger.
When you were being abusive, did you know it was wrong?
Yes. Yes, I absolutely knew it was wrong. It's hard to justify that behavior, but you try to do it anyway so that you can protect yourself. And because to have to face who you are and what you're doing is a very difficult thing. I mean, it's harder for people to face lesser things, you know, like, hey, I'm late. People don't want to face that. Imagine having to face that you are really behaving like this monster. And so it's really, really difficult to do that. But deep down, and each person is different. Like, but for me, I knew that it was wrong. I just didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to change the behavior. I didn't know how to manage my emotions. If I felt a certain way, I never learned how to manage them. No one ever showed me, you know, how to respond when something very, very difficult or emotional came up in your life. And so it was definitely a journey, but yeah, I absolutely knew. And then after, of course, you feel horrible after, and then you make the promises. Okay, I'll never do it again. And I say this to people now. I work with offenders groups and victim groups, and I say, without a change agent, it's not going to change. Someone's word saying I'm going to change, no. You can't change by yourself. If you could change by yourself, you would have did it already. You know, if I could have changed on my own, I would have done it myself. So I needed help. I needed someone else who was more skilled in that area than myself to teach me about those emotions, why I respond that way. And so once I got an understanding of it, then I said, oh, okay, this is how this works. And I was able to make the change. But I have to say that I absolutely knew that was wrong. And I think the majority of people that are doing this know that it's wrong, other than those who have some sort of mental illness. If someone has mental illness, then that's a whole different ball game.
During the abuse, did you ever feel remorse?
Yes. Yes. I initially, you know, the typical offender will try to blame outside events. If she didn't do this, or if she didn't push my buttons, or if he didn't do this, or he didn't do that, or, you know, it's everyone else's fault. So that is a sort of a buffer to try to not accept responsibility for it, because that remorse is going to make you feel extremely uncomfortable. And so after, you know, any event, I would feel horrible because I knew this is not who I'm supposed to be. But again, I did not know how to stop. And so again, everyone's different, and there are different offenders at different levels of this. Some people don't feel remorse because they're so padded in this denial that they really believe they didn't do anything wrong. The fact that when he came home and there was no dinner, that justified the behavior. So the justification becomes so thick that they actually truly believe that they didn't do anything wrong. So the remorse, it takes a long time to get to the remorse. And so that's something that I do when I work with offender groups, help them get to that place a lot sooner, of actually seeing what they're doing, because that's what it's about. Because a lot of offenders don't understand or see the damage that they're causing. And so once they're able to do that, then they can get to that remorse place. One mistake that a lot of people working with offenders make is they want remorse right off the bat. They want remorse right now. It's like, no, that's a process for them. They have to understand what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing sometimes. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But to get to a place of actually showing them and accepting and letting them digest what they've done, then the remorse comes. It's a process in a nutshell. But if you keep working with offenders, then eventually they'll get to that process.
Were you ever afraid of getting caught or going to jail?
Yes, I was. I went to jail. I went to jail twice for this. For some people, jail is a deterrent. Other people, it doesn't really matter. It's just a vacation. I didn't like jail. I didn't want to go to jail. But jail is not the answer as far as change. Jail is the pit stop to help because there's like when you're out of control, you have to go to jail to get you under control. But that's one step. And then we have to follow up step 2, 3, 4, 5 to help that person change. So some people think that, jail is going to change. It doesn't change. Actually, you go to jail, you get more pissed off. You learn more ways because you're in there with a bunch of people who've done the same or worse, things. And then, that doesn't really change you, but sometimes it's a wake-up call. And it's definitely a necessary step for people to wake up. Because otherwise, if you didn't have the law enforcement piece, I couldn't, that's definitely necessary. But it is something that some people think about, but I can't say it's a deterrent that's going to stop you. Because what you'll do is you'll do it and then you'll try to cover it up. You'll convince her or him to not say anything to the police when they come, because the ramifications of that, we don't want the ramifications. So, but again, it's definitely one of the first necessary steps.
What consequences did you face when you were an offender?
Well, the first one was, let me go back. The first consequence that I faced was the loss of respect for myself. Before I offend anyone else, I offended myself. I lowered my standard as a man. Most offenders they're high on respect. They want respect. They want to be respected. And in the groups, I always talk to them about how we want respect, but we don't behave in a respectful manner. We want respect, but yet our behavior resembles that of a toddler throwing a tantrum. And that's literally the type, I equate the two, 5-year-old throwing a tantrum, 28-year-old throwing a tantrum, and, acting out on someone else. But those behaviors are definitely difficult to come out of, but it's definitely possible. And so.
Did anyone ever tell you that you needed help?
Yes. So when anyone approaches you and when you're in that mind frame, your first, this is with anyone, with any issue. Most people with issues in general, when you tell them about that issue, their first response is to protect that issue, because you don't want to feel the embarrassment, you don't want to feel the shame, you don't want to feel less than, you don't want anyone to know that something's wrong with you. So most people will defend. And that's even more so with offenders, because we know what the consequences are. The consequences, I can go to jail, I'll lose my job, I'm gonna lose my money, I'll lose my relationship, she's gonna leave me, blah, blah, blah. So it's definitely something for us to, keep in mind when it comes to how to change this process.
What do you think victims should do when they're being threatened by their abuser for trying to leave?
I can't say what anyone should or shouldn't do. I think that's above my pay grade. Mm-hmm. But if I were to say anything, there are plenty of resources, and the resources are set up to help victims to find ways, whether it's a shelter, if it's financial assistance, if it's just a safe place to come and talk. But the victim has to be ready. I know that much. They definitely have to be ready. But I know that, I mean, speaking from the offender's side, I know that change doesn't happen with just our words. And I say that to victims, like, don't just take the word that you actually have to see the action. You have to, okay, you have enrolled in a counseling class and you're going to that class and you've committed to this class and you know, you've committed to that change.
Do you think a restraining order will prevent the abuser from returning?
Sometimes. Depends on the abuser, depends on the level. If this person's not afraid, if they're not afraid of jail, then they're not worried about the paperwork. So a restraining order is some people will, you know, respond to it. I'm actually having a conversation with the district attorney, hopefully soon, to address that area, to where there is going to, I want to implement a program to where offenders are assigned an engagement specialist. So let's say if you're convicted of domestic violence, you're assigned someone to help walk you through that. Because currently what happens, if they're convicted, they're pretty much on their own. And the court just says, oh, here's this piece of paper, don't get in trouble. And you're talking about someone with deep emotional issues. So that's why we see a lot of restraining orders violated, because there's no one to help walk them through that. And so the help is so far, it's either police or the court system. And no, you need someone to meet with them weekly, walk them through that process, help them understand what this is. Okay, this is what you need to do. This is how you're going to get your family back, if that's even possible. You know, and I work with offenders, so it may not happen. And so I walk them through that process as well. But restraining orders are again, a necessary piece, but they're not complete. There needs to be someone there to walk them through that. A weekly case manager to, hey, look, let's meet on Tuesday and let me talk about your concerns. I know you're pissed off because of court. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about what happens if you decide to go to her house when there's a restraining order. What's going to happen? Because a lot of times they don't think that far. Because you have to remember, a lot of offenders, they're emotion driven. They're emotion driven. So if they're emotion driven, they need tools to manage those emotions. And so they're very impulsive. So if you leave them to their own devices, it shouldn't be a shock that the restraining order gets violated.
We were talking outside about the 52 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit about that?
So when you're convicted of domestic violence, either a felony or a misdemeanor, you're given you're ordered to do a 52-week batterers intervention class. And the 52-week class just teaches the offender different methods of how to control themselves, introduces them to the cycle of violence. There's a lot of things that you're taught in the class, and it's a group setting. So you may go into a class and there's different people in the class at different levels. Some have been in there for 22 weeks, some have been 5 weeks, some are brand new. And so there's different levels of offenders in that group. And the class is definitely, again, it's another step towards helping offenders, but in my opinion, it doesn't go deep enough. Just speaking from the standpoint as a man, men don't do well in the emotional environment, speaking in general. And so when you put us in the room with other men, I'll talk a little, but I'm not going to say the real issues that I'm going through as a man, because there's other men in the room. And I don't know these guys, and even if I did know them, I'm not going to tell, what happened to me when I was 5, or what the real issues that I'm going through, because shame, embarrassment, and men, we're not socialized to do that. We're not socialized to talk to other men about our deep-seated issues. When you think of offenders, I look at offenders as man or woman that's a broken individual. They're broken. They're emotionally broken. They need help to address themselves. But that class, the 52-week class, is definitely, again, it's a great step. But as far as I'm concerned, it needs to be implemented with a component of individual counseling, where they can go into a safe space where they can dig out the root of that behavior. Because the 52-week kind of just gives you scenarios, teaches you how to do timeouts, teaches you, some basic emotional management techniques. But individual counseling will help you dig a lot deeper into what actually happened, how you got to that place.
Okay.
We're going to take a moment of break.
Okay.
JP has to leave.
Okay, all right, all right. Appreciate your help, man. Okay, have a good day. Are we doing okay? Are we good? Everything? Okay. What's that?
How are you doing?
I'm fine. This is my element, man. That's what I do.
Public speaker on here real quick?
What's that?
You're public speaker?
Yeah, I do these domestic violence. Everything I'm talking about, I do this in presentation.
Okay.
So next month I'll be speaking to the Marines.
Oh, wow.
About 7,000 Marines at that event.
Is it this thing? Check.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Just gonna check it over.
How is like talking Marines versus like talking to?
It's the same, it's just like I'm talking to you. I don't look at them as Marines, they're people. I mean, they're people. Everybody I go to, they're just people.
Prime military?
No,
Oh, okay.
no. I search out any entity that has a captive audience of men.
Fair enough.
You know, so sports teams, Marines, and I did the Navy a couple months ago, and also, I mean, it doesn't have to be just men. You know, there's plenty of events I go to, and it's women and men. I mean, everyone needs to hear, you know, this side, because this is going to help to change this.
Of course.
That's why I do this.
Back at it.
Okay.
Since we were on the topic of the 52-week class,
Mm-hmm.
and this is something else we talked outside.
That's fine.
What do you
Mhm.
think schools should do to bring awareness?
Schools. So we could, you know, from the prevention aspect, schools could definitely start implementing classes that can not just bring awareness to healthy relationships, but actually teach a class on it. Excuse me, it could be a component of a life skills class that goes into a lot of different, areas. And for this chapter, we're going to talk about healthy relationships. And so they'll talk about sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, and it'll cover all of those areas. You know, that's, let's say, at a high school level. And, because right now our electives, I mean, nothing against ceramics, but, you know, ceramics is fine, but I think a lot of people would need this information. You know, and then they could take ceramics later. But that's, let's say, at a high school level. At the university level, one thing I'm proposing is that, you know, this becomes an actual class that everyone has to take. And because it's in our society, whether we like it or not, or whether we know it or not, it's happening on a grand scale. And so I figure that, you know, if as soon as you enroll, this is one of your classes that you have to take. You know, either gender equality or relationship management or emotion management, something like that. But it should be something that is mandatory to take. I mean, and what's the worst that can happen if we learn this information? I mean, it's not going to kill us to learn information. It's actually killing us to not know this information.
What's something you think abusers should know that they wouldn't want to hear?
This is your issue. It's no one else's issue. It's not anyone else's fault. It's not the neighbor's fault for calling the police. It's not, you know, your spouse's fault. It's not, you know, someone's fault for quote unquote pushing our buttons, all of those type. It's not anyone else's fault. It's your issue, and the sooner they can understand that, then they can change. The reason a lot of change isn't happening is because people are not fully owning the responsibility. In order to change this, you have to fully digest that this is me. No one else can force me to lose control of myself. I choose that. And so explaining to them how that happens, you get to the different, I do the offender groups, different parts of the brain, you know, the limbic system, which is, you know, responsible for emotion. And so whatever feeling you have goes to your limbic system first, and then hopefully it reaches the frontal cortex, the frontal lobe. And that dynamic is something that helps, you know, offenders understand the dynamic between the two parts of their brain. So we get into it with this. Like, I really go into the details of this and help people understand, because I always tell them you have to keep your brain on. You can't leave it to your limbic system, because that's just the feeling part of your brain. And that's where the domestic violence, you know, the feelings happen, the emotions happen, and then so it's the fight or flight. The frontal lobe is not thinking, and that's why after they're done, they're like, oh man, what did I do? Why did I do this? Because you weren't thinking. So that's what I would say. That's definitely what I would say. It's not anyone else's issue. And the sooner you own that, the sooner you can change your life and have a better life. It's better, I tell offenders, it's better for you to own your behavior because you get to change your relationship. You get to change your life.
Do you think every offender has some sort of mental illness?
No. Most offenders are just, people that have grown up in an environment that says that violence is okay. And even if you grow up in an environment, even if you don't grow up in an environment that says violence is okay, our society in general says it's okay. We live in a patriarchal society that promotes domination from men over women. Men are taught to dominate, men are taught to be in control, and so that is problematic in a relationship. I mentioned I'm going to speak to the Marines, and so the Marines in one arena are considered one of the most elite army forces, armed forces on this planet, and that's fine and dandy on the battlefield. But when you get home, what happens there? You need to be dad. You need to be mom when you get home. They don't need a sergeant, a staff sergeant. They need someone that's going to listen to them. They need someone that's going to rub their back. They need someone that's going to, help solve the issue without violence. So, I'll stop there on that one.
What steps do you think offenders can take if they want to change?
You have to get help. You have to get help. You have to get help. You have to own the behavior. But a lot of that comes later. The first thing is to understand that you need assistance. You need help. When I do my offender classes, that's one of the things that I focus on. Again, we're socialized to not reach out when we're hurting. If you think back to high school, when you think back to high school, I mean, you think about the high school and you see the girls on campus and they're hugging, they're, holding hands and they're, crying to each other. And you look at the guys, what are the guys doing? We're punching each other. Hey, what's going on? We're doing, and we're not showing emotion. We don't show emotion. So in a lot of ways, we're and again, I'm speaking in general, we're stunted emotionally. So we need help in that area. And so it really is, we have to get help. We have to get help from someone who specializes in this area to help us change. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. You'd be shocked that, I always say everybody has something. Everybody's walking around with something. You may not walk around with my issue, but you have your own struggle, and that connects us all as human beings. I mean, one of my best examples is that, you think it's LeBron James. Everybody knows LeBron James, but you know what his kryptonite is? He's losing his hair. There's nothing he can do about that. Like, we all have something that is going to vex us. I use that as a funny example, but we all have something that we're struggling with, but for some reason, our society, we're ashamed to say, I struggle, as if the other people don't struggle. We all struggle in some way. So getting help to me is paramount, and it's something that I want to help remove the stigma from. There's no stigma in needing emotional help. It's no different than, if I ask everyone in this room or anyone on this camp, have you ever been to a hospital or a doctor? What do they say? Yes, I've been to a hospital and a doctor. So you go for physical wounds. But if I ask, well, what about your emotional wounds? Most people don't even know they're there. They're in the background like the apps on your phone. And if you don't deal with them there, what do? They drain your battery. So they're in the background and they're draining your life. But people don't know that they're there. And then when you bring them up, they're like, oh, it's not a problem. Like, yeah, you drink too much. No, I don't. 17 beers later, or you have an anger problem and you yell at them at the top of your lungs. No, I don't. Okay. So it's just, help is really, really important. And I harp on that. Because again, if you could change yourself, it doesn't matter what issue I'm talking about, you would have done it yourself. but there are people that specialize, that go to school, that have lived that life. And so they're out there. And so my message is to seek them out and go help yourself.
What motivated you to change?
Crash and burn. My whole life crashed and burned. Family crashed and burned, and, you know, divorce, and, you know, my relationship, you know, everything. It was a wake-up call, and it was like, whoa, wait a minute, what the heck is happening here? And so I did the math, and by that I mean I said, okay, so my first fight was with my mother. First relationship, I was 19 years old, there was domestic violence. Got married to another young lady, and I introduced domestic violence into that relationship. So when I did the math, there's, you know, these one childhood relationship, 2 adult relationships, domestic violence present in both. One common denominator was me. And so I said, okay, well, I must be the issue here. And so I just accepted that. I was like, okay, look, and because I wanted a better life, I knew that that could not be the only life that I could have. And so I said, okay, well, you know, if I'm the issue, then I need to change. And my change wasn't to save my family. You know, we had crashed and burned. We were so dysfunctional and toxic in our marriage. And I had my issues and she had hers. And so she had to work on her stuff separate from me. But that change came from just, you know, when that was over. And I said to myself, you know, I think I'm going to be in a relationship again, but I damn sure don't want it to go this way. And I had to accept responsibility, saying, okay, well, here's the negative dynamics I brought to the relationship. So now I need to change those. I can't control anything, whatever her issues were, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to change me. So the next relationship that comes along, I won't carry that same hot garbage, that's my term, hot garbage into the next relationship. So that's really, really important for me. That time alone, it wasn't, you know, I didn't have anybody to, you know, blame or, you know, walk me through it. It was just, okay, myself, my counselor, my group. You know, I went to individual counseling on my own. I went to group counseling. I went to secular counseling, church counseling, co-ed counseling, men's only whatever. And each place I went helped me put together a piece of who I was. And so it was, that was really, really good time, but it hurt. It was lonely. It was scary, you know, because I'm literally having to learn a new way of life, you know, so it's like, you know, okay, you're right-handed now, you only use your left hand from here on out. I'm like, wait, okay, how do I make an A? You have to learn, you have to engage parts of your brain that you've never used before. But it was the best thing I've ever done in my life. Self-work, and I'll say that, self-work is the best work you ever do in your life. Nothing else even comes close. I don't care about your job, your career, your school, education, nothing. Because we'll go to school and we'll become educated on a subject that we're interested in. And we'll know more about our job description and our major than we will about ourselves. That's not okay. You know, that's not okay. We have to know who we are. And so self-awareness to me is a superpower. And I gained self-awareness from falling down, crashing and burning, and then coming back up from that. But definitely was the point where I lost everything. And I said, okay, I need to change. And then, again, best thing that ever happened to me.
What have you done so far to change your life around?
So it was the going to the individual counseling. So at this point, I'm done with the courts. I'm done with the 52-week class, and you know, but I'm still not. I don't feel like I still have some ways about me that I still have some attitudes that are not okay. And so once the relationship ended and I started going to individual counseling, that's where the root of my issues came about. And that boiled down to self-worth. It boiled down to self-esteem, and knowing who I was, knowing the position and power that I hold, and just in and of myself. But sort of like the villain and the superhero, I'm using my powers for the wrong reason. That was me. And so once I was able to discover who I was and what my actual purpose was, then that just completely changed for me. And so, after I discovered, myself and became self-aware and was able to make the changes, and this was probably about a 4-year process. This is not overnight. It's not a quick fix. It's not a, hey, I went to counseling for 4 months, 6 months. I tried it for six. No, that's hot garbage. You have to keep going. You have to keep going and keep going, because there's so many different dynamics to us as people that, you'll go for one thing and then you'll end up in a completely different area. Because I went to, because I drink too much. And then you start talking about your childhood stuff. And then you realize about your stepdad and realize about your grandmother. And the rabbit holes just go so many different places. So it's important to just commit to the process of change. But that definitely was instrumental in my healing and I say healing intentionally because offenders have to heal. They are broken. They are broken people. You cannot be a complete human being and treat another human being that way. There's just no way. You cannot be a complete human being. You can't be fully, have healthy self-esteem, a healthy outlook on life, and then treat another person like garbage. So healing is necessary for them, and that's one of the focuses that I use when I work with offender groups, because so that pretty much was the steps that I used, just going to get help. I needed help.
Can you mention some organizations that you know in San Diego, even your own?
I did a lot of my work in Los Angeles. My organization is Inspire Perspective, and my website is dwaltower.com. There are plenty of agencies in San Diego that can help, and I mean, you can just pull up 411. And there's too many to name, but they're everywhere. If you just search domestic violence, it's going to come up. Offenders group as well as victims groups, and people think that it's this difficult process, or I can't find any. My mentor Google tells me everything I need to know. So if all you got to do is Google it, and you will find something that and close to yourself, because whether people know it or not, classes are happening right now as we speak. Classes are going to happen tonight, for offenders and for victims.
Is there any organizations you were in that you would recommend?
I would. There's a lot of different organizations. For me, from an offender standpoint, the organization called POPS is with Casey Family Services. We have a Center for Change. Those are a couple of organizations that I know just off the top of my head. But again, that may or may not fit you, and everyone is different. What works for me may not work for that person. So they may love this organization, or because it's in this area, or because the counselor is is a better fit for them. So my encouragement to people is to seek out what is going to fit for you, because during my healing journey, I had to find what was going to fit for me. And I went through a couple of places, and I was like, that one doesn't work, or this one's. And I finally found, okay, this is what I need. What I mean by that is I didn't go to places and say, well, I don't like what they're saying to me. They're telling me to be accountable. No, that's not what I'm talking about. It was a fit where, okay, I could grow in this place, and they're going to say, I'm going to allow this person to say the hard things to me, and I'm going to share the hard things, that are in my life. So. It's important for a person to find a fit. Fit is really just like buying a car, buying a house, finding a spouse. It has to be a fit. It can't just be, it's not just plug and play. You may go to 2, 3, or 4 different places before you find the places for you. Excuse me.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't mentioned?
I'd just like to thank you for doing this. I really would like to thank you, all of you, for doing this. This is a great endeavor. And to bring awareness is a great thing. And, to those watching, I just want to say that, whatever area of your life, again, I speak about domestic violence, but this covers everything. Whatever else you're going, deal with it. I always say, in offenders groups, deal with your demons. Otherwise they'll take control of your life. and we all want healthy relationships. All of us want healthy relationships. Offenders want healthy relationships. They just don't know how. And so they need to be taught how to do that. And so the point is to, work on ourselves, become self-aware, deal with your stuff, so you stand a better chance of going into a healthy relationship and not, ending up in the emergency room or in the back of a police car or those type of situations. So, but I just, again, I really thank all of you for what you're doing, and I really commend you. Hats off to you. And who knows where this work goes from here, and you are appreciated.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any questions?
I have one question.
Okay.
I guess we've seen a lot of victims of domestic violence,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting because you're one of our first people to talk about from a different perspective.
Right.
So I guess what do you have to say? Not what do you have to say, but how do we help the people who are victims of domestic violence? Is it support groups? It's the self-care.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what should we?
What should we do to help victims?
Yeah, I guess what should we do?
I think in order to help victims, I think we need to become serious about this as a society. I don't think we're serious. We talk, we give lip service to it, but then when the funding part comes, we don't have funding for this, and they have to close down shelters, and a woman who can't go to a shelter because she has a 16-year-old son, those type of issues, that should never be these barriers. We need to remove the barriers. I mean, if we're going to call ourselves the greatest country on earth, then we should be able to do this. We should be able to make access, easy for a person, or easier for a person who, a woman has 4 kids, we can't accept that. Okay, well, where is she supposed to go? And why is funding an issue in this day and age? Why is funding an issue? Why should any, family have to? There are families that get turned off by the system because of the barriers that we have. We can't do it this week, or it's not going to happen, and to me, I think that's unacceptable. I think it's, we have to put more emphasis on it. And there's great people doing this work to help victims and to I work with a lot of them, and they're like just working their hearts out, to help, but then their hands are tied in certain areas because of the red tape and then the politics behind it, and how people aren't taking this as serious, and I mean at the top, but thankfully that's changing. It is changing, and I see it changing with some of the new people we have in Congress. We have way more women in Congress than we've ever had, and so that brings balance, and I welcome that balance. We need balance. Far too long we've just had one perspective. And I always say, well, how's that working out for us? It's not. So we need that balance. But if even if you're supporting someone, if you have a friend or someone that's in a relationship, the best thing you can do is be there as a non-judgmental, supportive person. If you're saying, hey, you need to do this, and then they don't do it, then you turn your back on them. That's not helpful. And so it's just accepting that their situation and she or he has to see it when they see it. But when they do see it, it's important for them to know, hey, I can call such and such. She's always there for me, or he's always there for me, so I can talk to them. So it's really important to just kind of walk beside them and understand, because a lot of people get judgmental. Well, why don't you just leave? Or why don't you just, understand the dynamics? There's very deep-seated dynamics and ties that they have. It's financial, it's emotional, it's physical, it's fear, it's so many different things. But to be able to walk alongside them and then point them in the right direction when they're ready, when they're ready. That's one of the best things you can do, from my opinion. Of course, my opinion is not the only one. There's others, but just more support. Just like we just have to support. It shouldn't be so hard to help people who are facing these type of situations. So hopefully that answered it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Cut.
Hey, any more questions? Feel free to ask. Feel free to ask.
Maybe I don't know.
Well, how many years have you been public speaking?
4 years.
4 years?
Been doing this for 4 years. So my healing journey was like it was like 3.5, more like 3.5 years. And then after that, I was like, okay, I called the San Diego Domestic Violence Council. I'm like, hey, look, this is my story. I don't even know if what I'm doing is right, but out here. And then they said, yeah, we have an event. We'd like for you to come speak, and share your testimony. And then I went. I'm thinking it's going to be a small room. There's 350 people in that room. There's chief of police there. There's probation. There's all these people there, and it was just a very nerve-wracking experience. But it was one of the best things I've ever done, because it was just, and after that event, I remember this little old lady. She's like probably like 80 years old, and she walks up to me and she's crying. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, damn it. I said, I messed up. I'm never doing this again. Like, I'm done. And she thanked me. And she said, she said, thank you. She said, I've never heard a man say thank you. She said, my ex-husband, who's now passed away, was very abusive. And she says, I've never heard someone say that I'm sorry, or never heard a man say, hey, I'm wrong. And she said, so to hear that, she says, I took that as for me. And I said, I didn't know it, but it was for you. And, so that let me know, keep going, keep doing this. It's not about me, because I still had some shame and some fear, and what are people going to think about me? But over the years, I've just gotten over that. Like, I'm not, the purpose of this is too important for me to be worried about what somebody thinks about me. Like, and, not to be rude or anything, but there's a bigger picture, that I have to focus on. Was that your question, or you had a different one?
It was my question.
Oh, okay.
You had another question?
I mean, I don't really.
Okay. All right.
I guess I was just very interested. I really like hearing a lot of these worlds, because everything
Like
is
personal stories?
Yeah, all these are personal, and
Yeah.
it's really special that
Yeah.
you came here to share it, and I think we've also had people to share their stories.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will, I guess, help people who are in these relationships come out, because a lot of it is like these people who haven't come out of these relationships, or they maybe they get a restraining order and they still get pursued. A lot of it is still happening. And
Yes.
I guess it's stuff. It's tough.
It's too many loopholes.
Yeah.
There's too many loopholes, and people are not, again, we're not taking it as serious as possible. For there to not be an offender engagement person, there has to be someone that engages the offender when they're convicted. And the only two contacts they have is when they go to court or the police.
So that actually brings me to my question. I'm going to ask you off camera whatever, but I'll probably forget. So do you have any kind of communication with, like, you mentioned like your ex-wife and the people you've had issues with in the past. Have you like apologized to them, or do you have any kind of like,
That's a great question.
Some kind of like, I don't know, resolution to that?
Yeah. So the first relationship I was in, I had a brief conversation via social media. She reached out to me, and we just had this like, wow, and it was like years later. And so we were like, what happened? And we were like, we just apologized. I was like, I'm sorry. And she was like, I'm sorry. Like, yeah, we were just these crazy kids and blah, blah, blah. And so we had this quick apology. My ex-wife, we have sons, we have kids together, so we still have to get along. And we actually get along really, really well. And people still think we're together because we'll sit at our son's game together. Like, we don't have the typical relationship, restraining orders. And the reason that is because of the healing. And that means I let go. I don't have any control over you. I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I don't want to sleep with you. I don't want to get back with you. I want to respect you. I want to show you respect because I wasn't able to do that. And that was a goal of mine. I said to myself during my healing journey, I said, I want my sons to see a different person. And so my sons at different points, they've all came to me and it's like, Pop, you're different. Like, you're different. You're not the same. Like, you smile more. You're laughing. You're happy. It's like, yeah, I got rid of all that hot garbage in my life. But it is possible. It's not common, but it is possible. And I don't, say this so they're like, oh, go try it. Like, don't try this at home. Like, you really have to make sure that it's, as the offender, it's only possible because I'm healed. Because she could want to be friends with me, and I could still be trying to manipulate and try to get her back and try to do this stuff and try to, regain control. So it's important for victims to, understand that it's not for everyone. But when you get to a place of true, full brokenness, and then rebuild yourself and healing, anything's possible. It literally is possible. We're actually talking about doing a presentation together where she's going to present, and because she actually teaches a class herself. She teaches a class for women, and we're just like simultaneously doing our work, not together, but we're doing, you know, our own different work. But it's possible, but you know, it's not common at all in any way, shape, or form. And that was important to me. It was important to me to, like, that was one of the things that it was really important for me to not only heal myself, but to make sure that I showed respect to her after our divorce. And like, okay, you didn't see this in the relationship, but hey, I'm going to show you now. You know, and that's just, we're a divorced couple. We have divorced couple issues. Like, hey, are you going to pay for the shoes, or are you going to pay for the shoes? Like, you know, typical stuff. But it's not where I need to curse you out, I need to call you all kind of names, I need to, offend you or hit you or do anything like that. It's like, okay, we disagree. You disagree? Oh, okay, well, we'll figure it out. Have a good night. I'm going home. Like, and that's how normal people live. Like, to me, I love that. Like, it's normal life, and I hadn't had that in my life. So I'm very happy to have that now. I'm happy to have those little simple disagreements that we have. It's like, okay, that's the biggest issue we got today. Who's going to buy his shoes? Psh, I'm good. It's not a problem for me. Like, we'll figure it out. I know it's not the end of the world. You know, so that was an important piece. And I put that, I speak with the offender groups about that. But I'm careful with them because some of that is not necessary, and the victim doesn't want that. They don't want any relationship. So that has to be taken into account as well. And a lot of offenders, they want to go back and help and fix the situation, but and I tell them, that's not up to you. That's up to her or him. You know, they may not want a relationship, and you have to accept that. You have to digest that and just be okay with that. And so just letting go is really, you know, is key. Like, letting go of the need to have, you know, or the expectation that this is going to, no, it's not. There's no expectation. It's no expectation. You know, I healed for myself. It wasn't for her. It wasn't for, I had to heal for me first. They're all beneficiaries of my healing. But I teach in talking to offenders, it's not okay to attach your healing to whether or not your relationship is going to work or not. Because what if it doesn't? And now you're mad, and you know, because she doesn't like you anymore, and now you don't want to go to class anymore. No, your healing has to be for yourself. And if you happen to continue a relationship, excellent. If not, excellent. Life still goes on. The earth is still going to rotate, hopefully. So hopefully that answered you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate helping you guys. And
like you said, it's kind of rare for people to
yeah,
talk about it.
yeah, no, this is,
Thank you.
I don't know if you can tell, I'm very comfortable in this area, and I want to bring everyone else to a comfort level in this area to where we have to have these conversations, because that's the only way this is going to change.
Yeah.
Only way this changes. So send me the viral video.